I never thought my husband was living a double life. My name is Margaret Dawson, and for 30 years, I believed I was married to a good, honest man. Richard and I met in our early 30s. We were both driven, career-oriented, and built our lives brick by brick. We raised 2 wonderful children, paid off our home, and supported each other through all the usual ups and downs that come with marriage. There were hard years, sure. Financial worries, long hours, personal sacrifices, but we always made it work. Or at least, that's what I thought. Richard worked hard. He climbed the corporate ladder at a large logistics company. Long hours, business trips, late-night calls. It was part of his job, and I was proud of him. I always supported his career, even when it meant missing family events or dinners. I told myself it was for our future, our retirement. We weren't flashy people. We lived comfortably but modestly. Our 2 kids went to good colleges. We traveled once or twice a year, and I truly thought we had made it through the hardest parts of life. We were now both in our mid-60s, finally ready to enjoy the fruits of everything we had worked for. And with his retirement approaching, I was excited to enter this new phase together. Little did I know, the man I thought I knew had been hiding a secret for the last decade. A secret that would tear our entire family apart. Richard and I met the old-fashioned way, through mutual friends at a small dinner party when we were both in our early 30s. He was charming, confident, and ambitious. I remember being drawn to how driven he was, how clear his vision for the future seemed. He had plans, and I admired that. After a year of dating, we got married in a small but beautiful ceremony, surrounded by family and close friends. We both worked hard during those early years. I was a teacher, while Richard worked in logistics and supply chain management. His company handled transportation for large retailers, and from the beginning, he was always chasing the next promotion. He often joked that he was married to his job as much as he was married to me. The hours were long, but the payoffs came with time. A few years into our marriage, we had our first child, our son, Matthew. 3 years later, we were blessed with our daughter, Emily. Our children became our world. Every decision we made was with them in mind. The house we bought, the neighborhood we chose, the sacrifices we made. While I balanced raising them and working part-time, Richard kept climbing that corporate ladder. By the time the kids were teenagers, Richard had become a senior executive. His job meant constant travel, conferences, negotiations, client meetings, but I never questioned it. He was providing for us, making sure we could put both kids through college, save for retirement, and live comfortably. His work allowed us to take vacations, to fix up the house, to feel safe financially. Of course, there were stressful times, the market crashes, the company restructurings, the occasional layoffs that affected friends and coworkers. But somehow, Richard always managed to hold his position. I was proud of him, proud that he could stay strong through it all, that he was so steady while so many others lost their jobs. It never occurred to me to wonder how that was even possible. I trusted him completely, and for many years, it truly seemed like we were one of the lucky ones. For many years, life just kept moving forward, filled with the normal ups and downs every couple faces. We raised our children, watched them leave for college, adjusted to an emptier house, and tried to rediscover each other as partners after decades of parenting. Richard kept working, and though his travel schedule slowed a bit, his career still demanded much of his time. But around his 50th birthday, I noticed something shift. He became distant, not all at once, just small things at first. He'd come home late some nights, more tired, more distracted. He wasn't as talkative over dinner. Sometimes I would catch him staring blankly, lost in thought, as if his mind was somewhere far away. I figured it was just work stress. After all, That was nothing new. Then one evening, he came home angrier than I had ever seen him. His face was red, his movements sharp, his voice harsh. He snapped at me over something small, something so meaningless I can't even remember what it was now. But the force behind it caught me completely off guard. He was never a man to raise his voice like that. Later that night, when things calmed down, I sat beside him and gently asked what was wrong. "It's work," he finally admitted, rubbing his temples. "Everything's a mess. There are budget cuts, management changes. I honestly don't even know if I want to keep doing this. I don't know if I even have a future there anymore." I held his hand and listened, offering whatever comfort I could. I told him we could get through anything, like we always had, that no job was worth his happiness or health. And for the first time, he seemed to soften, leaning into me like he used to when we were younger. For a while after that, things returned to normal. The late nights stopped, the tension faded. He became lighter, more present, more like the Richard I knew and loved. And I allowed myself to believe the worst was behind us. I didn't realize it then, but that was when the real secret had already begun. After that rough patch, Richard seemed almost lighter again, happier even. He told me work was getting better, that some of the pressures were easing. He even started traveling a bit more, saying there were new clients to visit, new projects to manage. I didn't think much of it. Business trips had always been a normal part of his job. But then I started noticing little things that didn't make sense. Richard had always handled our finances. That was our arrangement for decades. Not because I couldn't, but because he was good at it. And it was one less thing for me to worry about. Every month, he'd automatically transfer a set amount into my personal account for household expenses, groceries, and anything else I needed to take care of the house, while he managed the larger savings and investments. One month, the money didn't arrive. At first, I assumed it was a simple oversight. I called him while he was away on one of his trips. "Oh, I must have missed the transfer date," he said casually. "The auto payment must have expired or something. I'll take care of it right now." And he did. The money showed up later that day, and I didn't think much of it. But then, a month later, it happened again. No transfer. No money. This time when I called, he sounded slightly annoyed, as if I was pestering him. "Geez, it must have glitched again. I really need to double-check the online banking settings when I get back." He laughed it off, but his tone was off. Not angry, just guarded. Like he wanted to move on from the conversation as quickly as possible. I told myself not to make a big deal out of it. After all, mistakes happen. And after 30 years of marriage, you trust your spouse. I didn't want to create drama over what could have been simple banking errors. But deep inside me, something small began to whisper. This isn't like him. I knew Richard better than anyone. He never missed details like this. And yet, I pushed the thought away because I wanted to believe everything was fine. For most of our marriage, I never really got to know Richard's coworkers. His office was far, about an hour-and-a-half drive each way. And after we had the kids, I was happy to stay home during his work events. The company held the occasional Christmas party or summer gathering, but once the kids came along, I naturally drifted from those circles. It wasn't something I thought much about. Richard was always the one deeply involved in his work world. Over the years, he'd occasionally mention a few names from work. One name I heard more than any was Wesley, his closest colleague and, according to Richard, one of the few people he fully trusted at the company. They had worked together for years, and I always imagined Wesley as a kind of work brother to him, but I had never met him outside of brief introductions many, many years ago. And then one random afternoon, everything shifted. I was running errands in town when I suddenly saw a familiar face walking toward me. It took me a second to recognize him, but then it clicked. Wesley. He looked just as surprised to see me. Margaret. Wow. It's been ages. We laughed, shook hands, and exchanged a few friendly words about how long it had been. It was pleasant, warm, even. But then came the moment that made my stomach turn. So, how's Richard doing these days? Wesley asked casually, smiling. I blinked, confused for a second. What do you mean? I thought you saw him every day. Wesley looked momentarily puzzled, but he kept smiling politely. Oh, right. Well, I mean, since he left the company, how's everything going at his new job? I froze. New job? I repeated, trying to keep my voice light. You know, since he was let go about, what, 10 years ago? Hard to believe it's been that long already. Wesley chuckled, shaking his head. Time really flies. The world around me seemed to blur slightly. 10 years? Wesley continued, completely unaware of what he had just dropped on me. Anyway, I'm glad he landed on his feet. Everyone was pretty shocked when it all went down, you know? I forced a polite smile. Yes, it's worked out, I said, though I could barely hear my own words. We wrapped up the conversation with small talk, exchanged goodbyes, and I walked away, my legs feeling heavier with each step. 10 years. My husband had been lying to me for 10 years. But why? And how? I didn't have any answers yet, only a growing sense of dread that everything I thought I knew was about to collapse. When I got home that afternoon, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. There had to be an explanation. Yes, 10 years ago, Richard did seem different. And yes, that was around the time he'd been distant and angry. But even if he had been fired back then, surely he would have told me eventually. We'd been married for decades. We'd faced plenty of challenges before. If he had found a new job, what would have been the point of hiding any of it from me now? Maybe, I told myself, he had been too ashamed to tell me at the time. Maybe he lost his job suddenly and quickly found something else. Maybe he just didn't want to worry me or risk upsetting the stability of our home. I kept trying to convince myself that there was a reasonable explanation. But that tiny voice inside me, the one that had been whispering for years, was now screaming. And then I remembered Wesley had mentioned the name of the company where Richard supposedly worked now. I sat down at my desk, looked up the number for the company, and nervously made the call. My hands trembled slightly as the receptionist answered. Good afternoon, Preston and Myers Consulting. How may I help you? I swallowed hard. Yes, hi. I was hoping to speak with Richard Dawson. Please. There was a brief pause on the other end. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no one by that name who works here. I blinked. Oh, perhaps he's in another department? He's worked there for quite some time. The receptionist's voice remained polite, but firm. No, I've just checked our entire staff directory. We've never had anyone named Richard Dawson employed here. My throat went dry. All right, thank you for your time. I hung up, and then I sat there, staring at nothing, my heart pounding violently. He never worked there. He never worked anywhere. And suddenly, the last 10 years of my life no longer made sense. After hanging up the phone, I sat motionless for what felt like hours. I kept repeating the same thought in my head. He never worked there. He never worked anywhere. But then another thought crept in, something even more disturbing. If he wasn't working, how did we live like nothing had changed for 10 years? Our bills were always paid. The mortgage, the cars, the vacations, the kids' tuition. We never lived lavishly, but we were certainly never struggling. Where was the money coming from? I knew I couldn't sit with questions anymore. I had to find answers. And since Richard handled most of our finances all these years, I went to the one place he kept all his important paperwork, his home office. I rarely went in there. That was always his space. But now I didn't care. I started carefully going through his desk drawers, filing cabinets, and folders. At first, it was all typical paperwork: old tax documents, bank statements, insurance papers, nothing unusual. But as I dug deeper, I found a folder labeled simply Retirement. Inside were letters, official ones, statements from his pension fund, letters from his former employer's HR department. And that's when my stomach completely dropped. According to the paperwork, Richard had been drawing from his pension for years, since almost exactly 10 years ago. That made no sense. His retirement wasn't supposed to start for another few months. The pension money had been paid out in monthly distributions, enough to support us comfortably, but I quickly saw how much had been taken over the years. What made my blood run cold was how little was left. Nearly everything was gone. We had been living entirely off his pension for a full decade, and it was almost depleted. Even more unsettling, based on how much money had been drawn, there was no way our moderate lifestyle could have possibly used up that much. The numbers didn't add up. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands were missing. That's when the questions grew even darker. Where did all this money actually go? What was he spending it on? What else has he been hiding from me? I had walked into that office looking for answers. Instead, I had uncovered a hole far deeper than I ever could have imagined. After finding the pension papers, my head was spinning with even more questions. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just sat with this sick, hollow feeling in my stomach. The numbers didn't lie. Massive amounts of money had disappeared. But where had it all gone? I needed more. That night, after Richard had gone to bed, I quietly went into his home office again. I knew he often backed up files onto his cloud account and email system, all synced to his desktop. It was a long shot, but at this point, I was desperate. I opened his computer and logged into his cloud storage. My heart raced as I clicked through folders that seemed ordinary at first: business files, tax documents, photos from our family vacations. But then I found a folder simply labeled Personal. I opened it, and that's when my world shattered. Hundreds of photos appeared. Photos I had never seen. Photos of Richard, smiling, laughing, with a much younger woman. She looked like she was in her early 30s, and in many of the pictures, they weren't alone. There was a little boy with them, a toddler. In some photos, Richard was holding the child, like a proud father. In others, they were on what looked like vacations, holidays, even birthday parties. It felt like I couldn't breathe. I kept scrolling, my hands trembling. In another folder, I found scanned copies of official documents, a birth certificate, the child's name, one I had never heard before. Father, Richard Dawson. I sat there frozen, staring at his name printed right there under Father. My husband, my children's father, the man I've had shared a home with for 30 years. And now it all made sense. The missing money, the extra business trips, the late nights, the secret bank transfers. He hadn't just been living a lie. He had built an entirely separate life, a second family, a secret child. I had given him my whole life, my loyalty, my trust, my love. And for a full decade, he had been sharing himself with someone else. With them, every puzzle piece fell into place. And suddenly, the life I thought we had carefully built over 30 years completely crumbled before my eyes. After that night, everything inside me was numb. I was living under the same roof with a man who had destroyed everything, and yet he acted like nothing was wrong. Every morning, he kissed me goodbye like he always did. Every evening, he came home and asked about my day as if he wasn't hiding a full second life. The man I thought I knew was suddenly a stranger. Or maybe I finally saw who he truly was. I barely slept in those weeks that followed. I cried in secret. I stared at the ceiling every night, wondering how I had been so blind for so long. And yet, I pretended. I smiled at him, made small talk, played the part of the doting wife, while inside, my world was collapsing. And then came the reminder that almost broke me again. His retirement party, a gathering we had planned for months. Family, friends, colleagues, all coming together in our home to celebrate his career and his future. The same future that now didn't even exist. But instead of canceling it, I made a decision. That night would be the night I exposed him, in front of everyone. If he had the nerve to live a double life for a decade, then I had the courage to finally reveal the truth he had so carefully hidden. I began quietly collecting everything I needed. I downloaded copies of the emails I found, saved every photo, printed the birth certificate with his name on it, even pulled the pension records to show how he'd drained nearly everything to fund this secret life. I made digital backups. I organized it all carefully, methodically. No one would be able to question what I was about to reveal. And while I was filled with heartbreak, I was no longer scared. The fear had turned into anger. The anger had turned into clarity. I was ready. The evening of the party finally arrived. Our house was filled with family and friends, people who had known us for decades, friends from church, old co-workers, neighbors, even distant relatives who had driven in for the occasion. Everyone smiling, laughing, celebrating the man they thought they knew. I stood there, greeting guests, pouring wine, making polite conversation. And the entire time, my heart was pounding beneath my calm exterior. Richard was glowing, playing the role perfectly, thanking people for coming, shaking hands, accepting congratulations for a lifetime of hard work. Little did they know, half of that lifetime had been one long lie. As the evening progressed, Richard's best friend stood up to give a speech. He praised Richard's dedication, his loyalty to his family, his sacrifice to provide for us all. The words felt like knives piercing me. If only they knew. Then it was my turn. I had prepared a small, surprise tribute that Richard didn't know about. I smiled as I stood in front of everyone, holding the remote to the large screen we'd set up in the living room. Before we continue, I began, I thought it would be nice to take a little walk down memory lane, a way to honor Richard's full career. I clicked the remote. At first, the screen displayed old family photos, pictures of our wedding, vacations with the kids, snapshots of holidays. Everyone smiled warmly, some even teared up. It was exactly what they expected. And then I flipped to the next slide. Photos of Richard with the younger woman appeared on the screen. At first, people were confused. And then the photos of him holding the toddler appeared. The room fell completely silent. I let the silence sit for a few seconds before I spoke again, my voice clear, calm, but cold. For the past 10 years, Richard has not been working like we all thought. Instead, he's been living a second life. With her. I pointed at the woman in the photo, and with their child. I clicked again, revealing the birth certificate with his name printed clearly as father. While the rest of us thought he was at work, Richard was building a second family, draining our pension, lying to everyone in this room, but most of all, to me. There were gasps, shocked whispers. My parents covered their mouths. Some friends looked absolutely horrified. Richard stood frozen, his face completely drained of color. He tried to open his mouth, but no words came out. I continued. He has spent our retirement money to support this hidden life for a decade. And while we all believed we were here tonight to celebrate his years of loyalty, I believe it's only fair that everyone knows exactly what he's done with those years. The room was so silent, you could hear people breathing. And with that, I calmly set the remote down. I will not pretend any longer. After tonight, Richard and I will be separating. You can direct all further questions to him. I walked out of the room, leaving him behind to face the wreckage he created. After that night, everything unraveled exactly as I expected. The phone calls, the gossip, the endless questions from friends and family members who were just as blindsided as I had been. But I didn't owe anyone any explanations. The truth was finally out, and for once, I didn't have to carry the weight of his lies alone anymore. Richard tried to call me for days afterward. At first, it was denial, then excuses, then finally, begging. He said things like, "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. I was going to tell you, I swear. I just didn't know how. And of course, I still love you. But what is love without honesty? What is a marriage without trust? You don't get to have both a family and a second family on the side. You don't get to rob your wife and children of their financial security to play father to someone else's child in secret." The divorce was finalized within months. After the divorce, Richard moved in with his other family, the woman and child he had been hiding for a decade. In a way, I suppose he finally chose the life he had been secretly living all along. But I wasn't part of that life anymore. Our children were devastated. They struggled to process the truth of what their father had done. Some days, they didn't want to see him at all. Other days, they tried, but the hurt was written all over their faces. Our once tight-knit family gatherings disappeared. Holidays became smaller, quieter, and a little emptier. As for me, I moved into a smaller home, simple, peaceful, and fully mine. It was terrifying at first, starting over at this age. But slowly, piece by piece, I found my footing again. I found peace in knowing that, for the first time in a very long time, I was no longer living inside someone else's lies. I was free, and while Richard may have destroyed the life we built together, he did not destroy me. In the end, his secret life cost him everything, and I walked away with something far more valuable, my freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. What is your story? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.